Sophisto funk. We figured anything from France was sophisticated. Matter of fact, just to give you an example, I was at a recording session not too long ago, and it was a hardcore hip hop guy. I mean, hardcore gangsters, and there were these two guys in there who were beat makers from France, and the dudes who were the artists didn't know who were making the beats. They just knew them by name, but they didn't know who they were. They didn't know they were white. They walked in and they saw these guys making beats, and they said, "Man, the fuck you doing with those white dudes in the studio?" And they went, "Oh, no, no, we're not white, we're from France." They went, "Oh, you're French? Okay, cool, man, right on." So that was the interesting mystique that we all, as black people, have with France. So when we came up with our Sophisto funk, we figured Chic was that bridge between hardcore American funk and New York style sophisticated funk.
Wow, that's really interesting. Talk about Bernard Edwards and his bass playing style, because I mean, obviously, he's a unique player, and again, this bridge between disco dance music and funk, and he seemed like he was the one of the ambassadors.
Yeah, as I was saying, that funk for black artists was the same as rock for white artists. It was the self-contained unit. It was the bedrock of black music. And Bernard had a style that was uniquely his, just as, like I said, every funk band uniquely sounds like them. In other words, only the Ohio players sound like the Ohio players. Only, the Daz band sounds like the Daz band. It's that you have to be those guys to play those records, at least to play them right. When I first met Bernard, he was in a New Jersey funk band, New Jersey-based funk band called Willie Feaster and the Mighty Magnificents, and they were very, very funky. Bernard was a guitar player, and what had happened is that Sylvia and Joe Robinson of Sugar Hill fame were the managers of the band, and what had happened was the leader of the band, who was a bass player, had complained to Joe about not getting their money. Wrong thing to do. And Joe, this is folklore, but this is the way it was told to me, broke the dude's thumbs. So he no longer could play bass. So Bernard, who was a guitar player, started playing bass. So he picked up this bass and had the guitar style without a pick because he wanted to sound like a bass player. And there's no one else in the world who does that. So he starts playing like this, but meanwhile he's not holding a pick in his hand, and that's how he can go. Whereas everybody else, when you hear Anthony Jackson play, it's clearly with a pick. You can hear.
So he was basically picking with these two fingers, or
with his finger, with his basically his style. I can actually demonstrate it. It's not going to sound great, one, because I'm playing on a guitar, but his actual style is this. So he would play it as if he's holding a pick. So he could, and he'd go. So that's what it was. So he would play single notes. And that's why when his sound, he would go. And he would switch. And that's why his sound was so unique and great, because he could just jump back and forth between that style. Like I said, it's hard for me to do because it kills me even on guitar. But he practiced it for years and years and years because he was a guitar player naturally, so this felt comfortable to him. So the switch back and forth was effortless. And if you look at videotapes of Everybody Dance, you see it. The technique is beautiful.
I mean, the breakdown on was it "I Want Your Love"?
Mm-hmm.
There's the last 2-3 minutes. I don't know. There's a crazy breakdown, bass, guitar, drum.
Right,
That's my
right.
favorite part of the record.
Right.
Not to
Yeah.
say, you know,
Yeah, no.
you guys would like the last minute or two of every you would get off.
Yeah, that's what we do because we're musicians. It's funny. I always explain to people that Chic is the vessel for our compositions. That's really what Chic was. We were not a band in the traditional sense. People always talk about, they look at the back of our album covers and they talk about the revolving door of vocalists
Right.
and piano players and blah, blah, blah. And it was because if you think about Chic the same way you think of a symphony orchestra, Mozart or Beethoven could write the Ninth Symphony, but Beethoven can't play the Ninth Symphony. You need a symphony orchestra. I can write Everybody Dance, but I can't play it. I need the band to play it. I need an ensemble. Chic is ensemble music. Funk is ensemble music. Think about it. That's what I said. Funk is ensemble music. You need that collection of people to play funk. Anybody can play a funky lick. I can play a funky lick. Bootsy can play a funky lick. But you can't play a funk song without the rest of those people. And that's the thing. So when black music started to change, if you really think about it, the essence of the financial essence of the black music business just was ripped apart, because once you start taking those bands away, you're taking away the whole building, because now you don't need 7 people or 10 people or 12 people. Now you just get one guy, you get a producer, and that makes the record. So the whole foundation of our industry, from being a black musician, started to fall apart with the collapse of the funk band. And to this day, as you and I sit here and talk right now, there is one black band signed, The Roots. That's it.
It's crazy.
It's one. Whereas there was a time where that was what held up the music business, because once you signed that funk band, because you signed them as individuals, so to speak. So you signed it as one entity, and you got 10 guys, 15 guys, 12 guys. You got a self-contained unit that you paid as one entity, as if it were paying just an Aretha Franklin, or just paying a Chaka Khan, or just paying a Diana Ross, but you still got all of those people employed and making records. Now you hire Pharrell and you get Pharrell, and that's it. And there's not 20 people that come along with it unless he decides to hire them.
What do you make of one of the theories about that people have is that, in fact, that one of the things that has hurt is the fact that music education since Reagan has been a low priority. If you go to a public high school in New York, the music room is going to be a disaster. There's hardly any music teachers. Do you think that that's a factor, that kids just aren't being taught how to play?
It's absolutely a factor. As a matter of fact, I had a huge problem because I grew up in an era where public schools were fantastic. I was taught to orchestrate. I was taught everything I know about music. I was taught in the public school system. I was taught to write music. I was taught to orchestrate for a full symphony orchestra. By the time I was 13, I could conduct a symphony. And I learned that all in public school, right around in New York City. So when I first met the Shockley brothers, and we were on a panel, and we were talking about music, and I was just telling them how amazing Public Enemy sounded to me, and I was wondering, how do you know what I know, and circumvent that knowledge to do these compound tracks that are sort of anti-music theory, but are actually making music theory on a higher level, almost on the Miles Davis level, where he says, like, all you gotta do is learn the motherfucker, and then you unlearn it, that type of thing. Where Keith said to me, he says, what are you talking about now? He says, we don't have music class anymore. He said, we just learn to do this because this is what we hear. And I looked at him and said, what do you mean you don't have music class? And all of a sudden I was educated that all of these guys that were coming up were doing this on their own. They were inventing it on their own because they had no place to go. They had no teachers. They would just buy the gear and start figuring it out. They started figuring out how to make music. They would start sampling. They'd say, well, I'll take Good Times, since that already works. I'll take that, put in my little sampler, and make a little groove out of Good Times. And I was like, and all of a sudden my whole perspective on it changed, because I realized that they wish that they could have had the knowledge. When I started doing records, I started working with guys like RZA, and I started talking to him about, you know, key signatures and tonality and time signatures, and he would look at me with a blank stare, and I'm going like, wow, you're RZA. You know, what do you mean? And then I realized, oh right, he comes from the generation that had no music school, no music classes, nothing. They invented this on their own. They invented Wu-Tang Clan on their own. They get together, they like some beats, they start doing stuff, and then what happens is that because they get immersed in the situation, then the intellectual side of the artist comes out, and then they start to want to look for more. So as they get older, they start to develop other skill sets, but it all happens on a very sort of primal level, if you will. It's like they have to have music, they have to figure out a way to do it, and it's just like if you think in the Deep South, where people would find a bucket and tie something to it and start making an instrument out of it. We have to make music, right? Black people, we have to make, all people probably have to make music. So they figured out how to make music, and the technology gave them the ability to make very sophisticated music.
We've gained obviously a whole way of hearing. What have we lost as a culture in this transformation?
I would say that the main thing that we've lost is, well, economically speaking. I mean, that's the thing that bothers me the most, is because I grew up in a culture where you didn't have to be Nile Rodgers to do well. You didn't have to be Ashford and Simpson to do well. There was a whole middle class of artists. When I was signed to Atlantic, you had Chic at the top of the food chain from the R&B level, but you also had, you had CJ and Company doing Devil's Gun. You had